Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. We always love it when you send us your thoughts and questions. And lately, we've been getting a lot of really thoughtful messages about those times when you're learning English and it feels like you've hit a wall, like you're just not making any progress.
Yeah, you hit that plateau. It can be so frustrating.
Exactly. So, we're diving into all of your sources and experiences today to figure out some practical ways to help you break through those plateaus. We really want to equip you with some effective techniques and, help you find that motivation again to keep pushing forward in your English language journey.
And what's really interesting is so many of the things that you sent in, they all seem to agree that hitting a plateau in language learning, it's not just common, it's basically inevitable. Like it's something that almost everyone experiences when they're trying to master a skill as complex as language.
So we shouldn't see it as a sign that we failed or that we're not good at languages.
Right. It's more like a predictable phase that's part of the process.
Okay, so let's talk about what it actually feels like to be stuck in a plateau, because it can be pretty disheartening. You start learning English and everything's new and exciting. You're learning new words every day. You're starting to grasp basic grammar. You feel like you're making so much progress.
Yeah, and there's that rush you get from those early wins. I mean, think about it. At the beginning, every day you're encountering these fundamental elements of the language. So it feels like you're making huge strides every single day.
Right? You have that initial excitement and motivation because the results are just so obvious and tangible.
And they are, but then things start to shift.
Right. Yeah. Inevitably, it feels like things slow down. Those new words don't seem to stick as easily, and the grammar starts to feel overwhelming.
You're right. The grammar suddenly feels like this tangled mess, and it's like you've slammed right into a brick wall.
Yeah, exactly.
Ah,
And it's at this point that a lot of people start to get really discouraged.
yeah.
But one of the most important things that these sources highlighted is this. That slowdown doesn't mean that you've stopped learning.
It's more like the way you're learning is changing.
So it's not about the quantity of information anymore, but how our brains are processing it.
Right. You've moved beyond just absorbing new information like a sponge. And now you're at the stage where your brain is trying to refine and consolidate everything you've already learned.
Okay, I see. So it's kind of like laying down a foundation.
Exactly. Think of it like this. Your brain is working hard to integrate all those basic building blocks of the language that you learned at the beginning, and it's trying to make those processes more automatic so you don't have to think about them so much.
And that takes time and effort.
It absolutely does. And that's why it feels like you're making slower progress, because the focus is on solidifying your understanding, not just adding more and more information on top.
That makes a lot of sense. So when it feels like you're just going through the motions or not really getting anywhere, it actually means you've progressed beyond that initial beginner stage.
Exactly. Reaching a plateau is a sign of progress in itself. It means you're ready to move on to a deeper, more nuanced level of understanding. And those challenges that you're facing, they're actually a good sign. They mean you're ready to level up.
One of the sources used a really great analogy to explain this. They compared it to building muscle.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one.
It's like you might not see your muscles getting bigger every day when you work out, but the consistent effort that you're putting in is still making you stronger, even if you can't see it right away.
That's a really good way to think about it. And it highlights something really important that we need to remember as language learners. Those periods where progress feels slower are just as crucial as those times when you're making huge leaps forward. They're both essential parts of the learning process.
So it's like even when you don't see the results right away,
Mm,
the work is still happening beneath the surface.
exactly. And pushing through these plateaus, even when it feels really tough, that's what lays the foundation for long-term success in language learning.
Because you're building that solid base that you can build on.
Right. And those challenges are telling you that a breakthrough is just around the corner. So when you persevere through these phases, you're actually setting yourself up to achieve even greater fluency and confidence down the road.
Okay, so we've established that hitting a plateau is a normal part of learning English.
Yeah.
But what can we actually do to get unstuck? What are some practical strategies that can help us move past that feeling of stagnation?
Well, one thing that all the sources really emphasized is the importance of your mindset. The way you think about these plateaus can have a huge impact on how well you're able to overcome them.
Because it's really easy to start doubting yourself when you feel stuck. You might think things like, maybe I've reached my limit, or maybe I'm just not good at learning languages.
Yeah, and those negative thoughts can really sabotage your motivation.
They totally can.
Mm.
So how can we change our thinking to be more positive and productive?
Well, the sources stress the importance of consciously reframing those negative thoughts. When you hit a plateau, instead of seeing it as this huge, insurmountable obstacle, try to see it as a temporary phase.
Like a pause in the journey, not the end of it.
Exactly. It's a normal part of the learning process, and it doesn't mean that you're not capable of achieving fluency.
And this is where that idea of a growth mindset comes in, right?
Exactly. You know the work of Carol Dweck. She's a psychologist who's done a lot of research on mindsets. And she talks about this idea of a growth mindset, which is basically the belief that your abilities aren't fixed.
So you're not born with a certain level of intelligence or language learning ability.
Right. Instead, you can develop and improve your skills through effort, hard work, and learning from your mistakes.
And that's so important for language learning because it means that even when you hit a plateau, you don't give up. You keep believing that you can make progress.
And you know what's really cool? A growth mindset actually helps you see those plateaus as opportunities for growth.
So even when it feels like you're not making any headway, a growth mindset helps you stay motivated because you believe that all the effort you're putting in is going to pay off eventually.
Yeah, and at this more advanced stage in your language learning, the progress you're making might be more subtle and less noticeable than it was at the beginning.
Right. So maybe you're not learning tons of new vocabulary words every day, but you're starting to master more complex grammar structures, or you're working on refining your pronunciation.
And that's all really important progress, even if it doesn't feel as obvious or as fast as the progress you were making before.
It's like your brain is still working in the background, processing all this information and making connections, even if you don't see the results right away.
Right, and that's why the sources really emphasize the importance of trusting the process. They say it's essential to have faith that your brain is still learning and growing, even when it feels like you're stuck.
But how do we stay motivated when we don't see those big wins that we used to get at the beginning?
Well, one strategy that the sources suggested is to focus on celebrating those smaller victories.
So like those little moments when you finally understand a tricky grammar rule.
Exactly. Or maybe you use a new phrase in a conversation and you realize you said it perfectly.
Or you're watching a movie in English and you understand more than you thought you would.
Those little wins might seem insignificant, but they can actually give you a big boost of motivation.
Because they remind you that you are making progress, even if it's not as obvious as it used to be.
And if you keep track of all those small victories, they eventually add up to something really significant. They can help you stay motivated and build your confidence, which ultimately leads to those bigger breakthroughs that we were talking about earlier.
It's like a snowball effect.
Exactly. And the most important thing to remember is that plateaus are not permanent. They're just temporary phases. And with persistence, a growth mindset, and a belief in your ability to learn, you will eventually break through them.
Okay, so mindset is huge. But what about the actual methods we're using to learn English? If we're feeling stuck, could it be a sign that we need to shake things up a bit?
Absolutely. You know, a lot of the sources actually said that introducing some variety into your learning routine can be a really effective way to break through a plateau.
So if you're feeling stuck, maybe it's time to step outside of your comfort zone and try some new things.
Yeah. Because if you're doing the same activities over and over again, it's easy to get bored and lose motivation. And that can actually make you feel like you're not making progress when you really are.
So it's like your brain needs some fresh stimulation.
Exactly. So the sources suggested exploring different types of content and activities that go beyond just textbooks and vocabulary lists.
Like what kinds of things?
Well, they mentioned things like watching movies and TV shows in English.
Oh, that sounds fun.
Right. And it's not just about entertainment. It's actually a really effective way to learn because you're exposed to natural conversational language. You pick up on things like tone slang and cultural context that you wouldn't necessarily get from a textbook.
So you're learning how English is actually spoken in real-life situations.
Right. And the visuals and the storyline can actually help you remember new words and grammar structures more easily.
What about just listening to English, like podcasts or audiobooks?
Those are great options too. They can help you improve your listening comprehension, and you can listen to them on the go while you're commuting or working out or doing chores.
So you can fit them into your daily routine.
Exactly. The key is to find podcasts or audiobooks that you're actually interested in. That way you'll be more motivated to listen and you'll actually enjoy the learning process.
And that will help you learn and remember new vocabulary and grammar structures more effectively.
Yeah. And we can't forget about the importance of actually speaking English.
Right. That's a big one. And it can feel really intimidating, especially when you're in a plateau and you're feeling less confident.
I know it can, but it's one of the most important things you can do to improve your fluency. Because it forces you to put all the knowledge you've been accumulating into practice.
So how do we find opportunities to speak English if we don't live in an English-speaking country?
Well, there are actually tons of online platforms now where you can connect with native English speakers or other learners from around the world.
So you can practice your speaking skills in a more relaxed and low-pressure environment.
Yeah. And a lot of these platforms offer structured conversation sessions or language exchange programs where you can get feedback on your pronunciation and grammar.
That sounds really helpful.
It is. And there are also lots of great apps and online games that can help you practice your speaking skills in a fun and engaging way.
Yeah. I've actually used a few of those myself, and I was surprised at how effective they were.
Right. And they can be a great way to add some variety to your learning routine and keep things interesting. And the key here is that different learning methods activate different parts of your brain.
Well, that's interesting. So by mixing things up, we're actually giving our brains a more well-rounded workout.
Exactly. It's like cross-training for your language skills.
I like that. So diversifying our learning methods helps us develop a more comprehensive skill set, and it makes us more adaptable in different communication situations.
Exactly. And one of the sources made a really good point that I think is worth emphasizing. They said that tailoring your learning to your personal interests can really help you stay motivated.
So if you're interested in cooking, find some cooking tutorials in English. If you're into music, listen to English songs and try to understand the lyrics.
Right. Because when you're genuinely interested in the material, you're more likely to pay attention and absorb the information. And that can make a huge difference in your progress.
And it makes learning English feel less like a chore and more like something you actually enjoy doing.
Exactly. And that's really what it's all about, right? Finding ways to make language learning fun and engaging so that you stick with it. So don't be afraid to experiment with different methods and see what works best for you.
Okay, so we've talked about mindset and we've talked about methods. What's another key strategy for overcoming plateaus?
Well, the sources really stress the importance of setting new and challenging goals. Because often when you hit a plateau, it's because you've gotten too comfortable with your current level of proficiency.
So it's like you need to give yourself something to strive for to keep pushing yourself forward.
Exactly. And the key is to set goals that are specific and measurable.
So instead of just saying, I want to improve my English.
Right. You need to be more specific. For example, you could set a goal to have a 10-minute conversation with a native English speaker this month. Or maybe you want to learn 50 new vocabulary words and be able to use them correctly in sentences.
So you have a clear target to aim for, and you can actually track your progress and see how far you've come.
And those measurable goals give you a sense of accomplishment when you achieve them, which can be really motivating. The sources also recommended diversifying your goals.
So don't just focus on one area like vocabulary or grammar.
Right. Set goals that target different skills like speaking, listening, reading, writing, and even specific grammar points that you want to master. That way you're working on all aspects of your language ability and you're less likely to feel stuck in one area.
And it's important to make sure your goals are challenging enough to push you outside of your comfort zone.
But not so challenging that they feel impossible to achieve.
Right. It's about finding that sweet spot where you're stretching yourself, but you're not setting yourself up for failure.
Exactly. And another helpful tip is to break down those bigger long-term goals into smaller, more manageable, short-term milestones.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's easier to stay motivated when you have those smaller wins along the way.
And it gives you a sense of progress and momentum. And another thing that can be really helpful is to track your progress.
So you can see how far you've come and what you still need to work on.
Right. You can use a language learning app, a notebook, or a spreadsheet to track your progress, whatever works best for you. And don't forget to celebrate those milestones.
Yes, no matter how small they might seem, it's important to acknowledge your achievements and give yourself credit for all the hard work you're putting in.
Exactly. Celebrating your wins helps you stay motivated and it reminds you that you're capable of achieving your goals. And remember, setbacks are a normal part of the learning process. Everyone makes mistakes. The important thing is to learn from them and keep moving forward.
So don't get discouraged if you have a bad day or if you don't see progress as quickly as you'd like. Just keep practicing, keep learning, and keep believing in yourself.
And one more thing. Remember to be patient with yourself. Language learning takes time and effort, so don't expect to become fluent overnight. Just focus on making steady progress and enjoy the journey.
I love that. Okay, so we've talked about mindset, we've talked about methods, and we've talked about setting goals. What's one final super impactful strategy that we can use to help us break through plateaus?
Well, one thing that really stood out in all the sources was the power of immersion.
Immersion.
Yeah, basically creating your own English language bubble in your daily life.
So even if we don't live in an English-speaking country, we can still surround ourselves with the language.
Exactly. The idea is to make English a constant presence in your environment, not just something you study for an hour a day.
So how do we do that?
Well, there are lots of different ways. For example, you can start listening to English music podcasts or audiobooks while you're commuting or doing chores around the house.
Yeah, make it part of your daily routine.
Exactly. And when you're choosing content, try to pick things that you're genuinely interested in. That way you'll be more likely to pay attention and absorb the language.
So if you're a big fan of true crime podcasts, find a good one in English and start listening.
Yeah, or if you love cooking shows, watch them in English and try to make a conscious effort to notice new words and phrases that you hear. You can even write them down and try to use them in your own conversations later.
And the sources also mention the idea of trying to think in English.
Yeah, that's a really powerful technique. It can be tricky at first, but it can really help you internalize the language.
So instead of translating everything in your head, try to start thinking in English directly.
Exactly. And you can start small. Maybe just try to think in English for a few minutes each day. Or try to describe the things you see around you in English.
And what about finding opportunities to actually use English in real-life situations?
That's really important too. And thankfully, there are tons of ways to do that, even if you don't live in an English-speaking country.
Like what?
Well, you can join online communities or forums that are related to your hobbies or interests.
So if you're into photography, find a photography forum where people communicate in English.
Exactly. And participate in the discussions, ask questions, share your own thoughts and ideas. The more you use the language in real-life contexts, the more comfortable and confident you'll become.
And what about social media?
Social media is another great way to immerse yourself in English. You can follow English-speaking accounts that you find interesting or join groups that are related to your hobbies.
And that can help you learn new vocabulary and see how English is used in a more casual and everyday setting.
Right. And it's a fun way to stay up to date on current events and pop culture.
Another thing that a lot of the sources recommended was watching movies and TV shows in English.
Oh, yeah, that's a classic immersion technique, and it's super effective.
But sometimes it can be hard to understand everything that's being said, especially if you're not used to watching movies and TV shows without subtitles.
I know, it can be challenging. But start by watching shows or movies that you've already seen before. That way you'll already be familiar with the plot and the characters, which will make it easier to follow along.
And you can gradually reduce your reliance on subtitles over time.
Exactly. Start by watching with English subtitles, then try switching to subtitles in your native language. And eventually you might even be able to watch without subtitles altogether.
That's the goal, right?
It is. And even if you don't understand every single word, it's still really beneficial to expose yourself to the sounds and rhythms of the language.
And to pick up on those nonverbal cues like facial expressions and body language.
Right, because
Yeah.
those things are all part of communication, too.
And you know, it's funny, even making small changes like changing the language settings on your phone or your computer to English can make a difference.
Absolutely. It might seem like a small thing, but it's another way to make English a more constant presence in your life. And the more you surround yourself with the language, the more natural it will start to feel.
And the less it will feel like something you're studying and the more it will feel like something you're just doing.
Exactly. Immersion is all about making English a part of your daily life. And when you do that, you start to internalize the language in a much deeper way.
It becomes less about memorizing rules and more about just communicating naturally.
And that's when you really start to see those breakthroughs and make significant progress beyond those frustrating plateaus.
So to wrap up, we've covered a lot of ground today. We've talked about the importance of understanding that plateaus are a normal part of the learning process, and we've explored a range of practical strategies for overcoming them.
And those strategies include cultivating a growth mindset, diversifying your learning methods, setting challenging but achievable goals, and creating your own English language bubble through immersion.
And the key takeaway from all of the sources that you sent in is this. Plateaus are not a reason to give up on your language learning journey. They're actually opportunities for growth and a sign that you're ready to level up.
So if you're feeling stuck right now, don't despair. Just take a step back, reassess your strategies, try something new, and remember to be patient with yourself. You've got this.
And one final question for you to ponder. Now that you have a deeper understanding of why plateaus happen, and you have a toolkit of strategies for overcoming them, how are you going to use this knowledge to challenge your current boundaries and redefine what progress looks like for you in your own English language journey?
Yeah. What does progress even mean to you at this point?
Right. It's a question worth thinking about.
Mm.
That's all for today's Deep Dives. Thanks for joining us.
See you next time.